Hello and welcome to the Capital Call. This is episode 14, and I'm Quinn Milligan.
I'm Drew Milligan.
And let's get into it. It's after the close on the 10th of July. Happy 4th of July. Yes, we did skip an episode for the 4th of July holiday. What are you going to do, sue me?
Yeah, gotta take a break for those beers and burgers.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot to cover, obviously. Been a couple of weeks. We had a weird short trading week, so there's always something weird going on.
I'm sure the arbitrage guys loved that.
Oh, yeah. I guess, shoot, the BBB really does impact the economy quite a bit.
The big, beautiful bill. It's a heck of a name for a bill. It's great marketing, and it was very soundly derided by the opposition in Congress. And it was actually very narrowly passed. There were a lot of Republicans that actually voted against this. In the Senate, they had to get J.D. Vance to make the tie-breaking vote. Something that sometimes people forget is that if you have a 50-50 deadlock in the Senate, the vice president can actually cast a vote.
That would be interesting if the vice president was the second runner candidate in that case, right? Like they used to in the founding fathers, where the opposition would be VP.
That is interesting to consider. What if we were still doing that and you had Kamala Harris casting the deciding vote on that bill? Probably never would have made it to the floor because they knew it wouldn't have passed if it got to Kamala. But it's a heck of an omnibus funding package.
Apparently nobody read it because now there's a bipartisan effort to amend a portion of it that taxed gambling.
Yeah, I sure do love paying $20,000 in taxes on $10,000 in gains.
Yeah, because they treat the winnings without considering part of the cost basis. It was weird.
Yeah, well, they capped the total amount of losses that you could write off against your winnings, which meant that in net, if you were doing a lot of gambling, you could wind up in a situation where you actually were taxed more than you won.
Yeah.
So, which, regardless of your opinions of gambling, just seems kind of unfair. Like, I don't want to wind up $10,000 in debt to the government when I only have $10,000 to my, $5,000 to my name.
Yeah. But big parts of the big, beautiful bill include huge cuts to Medicaid and other services, keeping the corporate tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Yep. A lot of it does sunset in the same way that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did. There's this business on not taxing tips, Social Security,
not taxing auto loan interest.
Yeah, which is akin to mortgage interest write-offs. Got rid of EV incentives.
I would contend both the mortgage interest write-off and the auto loan interest write-off are not exactly well justified. But then again, consumers and voters like it, I guess.
Yeah, complicated tax code. It does ultimately increase the deficit because it has less cuts than the cuts to spending.
Yeah, Goldman Sachs is actually projecting that they're going to either have to increase taxes by 5.5% or cut the overall federal budget by 5.5% in about 10 years if they don't do anything.
And while we do have record tariff income, I think it was like $100 billion, it nowhere compares to the actual yearly government spending.
Yeah, I just love that they kept projecting that the tariff revenues were going to offset the amount that they were taking out in this budget.
It doesn't even come close.
No, the tariff revenues were a lot lower than they initially were promising, which was, if you know anything about tariffs, you really should have been expected. If I'm going to get tariffed 100% for being in China, I'm just going to move to Vietnam,
Yeah, and yet the tax on consumers because of the tariffs is increasingly economically significant.
I do find it very interesting, though. The best estimates I've seen, there were a lot of people that were projecting that you would start seeing those effects pretty fast, but what happened is, and I've said this before, you had a lot of front loading of inventories, which means that as soon as you would really see companies having to make decisions on pricing would be Q3 or Q4 of this year. For those that might not know what I mean when I say Q4, you're talking late summer, late autumn, for when you would start seeing some of those tariff taxation effects coming into effect. But another thing to consider here is that, for the long time, the tariffs that did go into place as of Liberation Day were not the ones that the Trump administration rolled out on that giant cardboard cutout or whatever it was. The one where they taxed the pigeons. on islands that weren't inhabited. They went with the lower 10% for the vast majority of countries, with the exception of China. And they're only just now putting the higher tariffs back into place. It appears to just be a rehash of the initially threatened tariffs that they put a 90-day pause on.
And the 90-day pause was set to expire in July, but they extended that to August 1st, and the administration claims that was the 90 days all along, although if you go 90 days from when they announced it, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there's really no certainty with the dates or the really policy generally with this administration.
And they're liable to just keep extending it or do something even wonkier. I mean, they were talking about there's 50% copper tariffs, 35%.
That's wild to me.
Yeah, American copper is really insignificant in comparison to the global market where we source our copper.
Right. The other thing the other interesting item on that is that if you think about copper production, they say that the largest copper mine in the world is copper recycling because copper is so easy to salvage and recycle and melt back down and use again. Which
it's very easily stolen.
Easily stolen as well. So, if those tariffs go into place, I expect a lot of copper pipes to start suddenly going missing from a lot of construction projects.
That reminds me, and I still don't know if this guy was scamming us for copper, but a while ago we got somebody claiming to be from the internet, the cable provider, saying he was taking down the old copper lines, and he had a sticker on his van, but he could have just been stealing copper.
Yeah, I really just it's not ours. I wasn't using it. We verified the guy. He appeared to check out in passing. I just felt really strange about the situation.
At a certain point, how much do you care about your internet service provider?
Yeah, and we get fiber here, so it's not like we're using the copper anyways.
Yeah.
Fun thing about copper lines though is the copper phone lines would often stay on even when your power went out, which was nice.
Yeah.
And not the same as a fiber optic these days, but
something we forget about.
Yeah. We're in an area that basically never gets blackouts, so
I still, although I understand how fiber optic cables work, I am still fascinated by the amount of data that we are just throwing on electrons that somehow find its way to the desired output. All this data is just constantly flowing. And I understand in principle how it works. It's amazing to me that it works.
Well, it's photonic, right?
Photons?
Photons. It's
literally
light.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, photons, electrons. Who's really the physics? Who's really not a physician? A physicist.
Who is a physician?
Neither of us are physicians, although we have interviewed a physician on this podcast.
That's true.
Yeah, we could have him back again, ask him physics questions, get him real confused.
But seriously, isn't it crazy that that photons just travel so quickly at the speed of light and create this complex web of data?
There was an interesting theory. For those that may not know, I actually initially went to school because I wanted to be a physicist. And it turned out that I was more, I more was in love with the idea of being a physicist versus actually doing the hard work of being a physicist. But there was this question posed by Richard Feynman, who was a very classic, very well-known physicist if you're into physics. And he posed the question of, well, all these photons are traveling at the speed of light, which means relativistically they don't age, which is a weird thing about photons. Like, if you try to think about the perspective of a photon, like imagine you are the photon that gets shot out of the star, and several light years later you hit your retina on Earth. What was the experience of that photon? And the answer is that photon didn't experience any time passing at all. From its perspective, from the moment of its birth in the star to the moment it hit your retina, those are the same instant. So the question became, from a physics perspective, well, photons are really weird. What if they're all just the same photon? What if there are no other photons? What if they're all just the same particle and we're just, they're just in different positions? But there's no, there was, I think this was discredited, by the way. This is not true, but
it's interesting thought experiment.
Interesting thought experiment. Weird things happen when you get into particle physics.
Yeah.
The markets are not particle physics, thankfully.
Yeah. But speaking of big complicated things, Nvidia hit a $4 trillion valuation. That is crazy.
They definitely deal with quantum mechanics.
I mean, what's the GDP of France?
Are you expecting me to know this offhand? I can look at. I've got a freaking. Let me consult my chart. Let me see what my chart says.
All I know is I'm pretty sure it's similar to California.
Let's see. It is gross domestic product change on a year ago. I don't have the exact figure. Never mind.
Well, anyways.
My chart doesn't say anything.
I mean, it's still insane. I think it's the first company ever to hit $4 trillion. GDP of France is $3 trillion. It is, what, 30% larger than the entire French economy?
Man, when I first saw it grow into that valuation, I was like, there's no way it can do it again. And then it did it again. That's not really a company that we at the fund would be invested in, but it's a heck of a big number. Speaking of appreciation...
It's the same... The GDP of California is $4 trillion, by the way. So Nvidia, which is based in... Isn't it based in California?
I believe it is.
Is valued as the same as the entire economy of California.
I'm pretty sure the Nvidia CEO is an alumni of U of O, by the way.
No.
Is
hey,
it OSU?
Whoa.
Them's fighting words.
Them's are fighting words. He is a proud Oregon State University alumni. He donated $100 million for, I forget for what, some technology center.
All that tells me is that the CEO of Nvidia definitely got plastered on a Tuesday at least once when he was an undergrad.
Oh, he definitely did. He went to the Angry Beaver. He did. I mean, this guy. Just look at him. He's a proud Oregon State University.
He's got to be proud Oregonian. Oregonians drink a lot of beer, I gotta say, and we're very proud of it too.
That's true.
So, although not as much as Wisconsin, we consistently come behind them in the numbers. I don't know what they're doing over there. OSU is the true work hard, play hard school of Oregon, and
my favorite graduate of University of Oregon is definitely going to be Patrick Milligan.
Patrick Milligan, yes.
Yeah.
The
famed... to all those listening that went to U of O, friends and family. I picked Patrick.
Dang, you didn't pick the actor? You didn't pick the guy that was on Bones?
Did Eric go to U of O?
I don't know where Eric went.
I don't think he did.
Well, anyways, one of our other cousins is an actor. He was on the TV show Bones.
Yeah? No, Eric went to the University of Michigan.
University of Michigan?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Where's that? What town is that?
What do you mean? It's in Michigan.
Well, yeah, but, is it Detroit? Is it, I don't know any other cities in Michigan. I'm sorry, Michigan.
It's in Ann Arbor.
Ann Arbor. Okay, well, yeah, Ann Arbor. I have heard of Ann Arbor.
Anyways, other things that happened. Obviously, the 4th of July. It's funny. I saw some warehouse in Southern California, like Santa Rosa, I think on July 2nd or 3rd. It housed a bunch of fireworks, and it caught on fire and blew up.
Fantastic.
Cue the video.
Disastrous.
Hopefully I found the video. You'll see.
Yeah, I think it was pretty grainy last I heard.
Yeah. The Fed Reserve's June meeting minutes released, last week. Actually, the decision makers were mixed on whether or not they should cut rates, how much they should cut rates, when they should cut rates. So there's some disagreement going on the Fed governance. A reminder that the Fed chair is not the sole decision maker for interest rates. So yelling at the Fed chair to cut interest rates, even if he wants to, won't necessarily yield any results.
Right. All this talk about maybe there'll be a shadow chair that's going to be more dovish or hawkish, and it's just that institution is designed not to be messed with.
The entire job of the Fed is to ignore politicians and pay attention to two things: unemployment and inflation. They maintain both of those directives, try to control both. They're at odds with each other, So it requires very careful consideration.
Mm-hmm. And they added that unemployment mandate later on in the life cycle of the Fed. It was only after stagflation really just screwed with the economy that they decided, okay, we need some guardrails. It can't just be inflation because there's bad outcomes from that.
Yeah.
Although one can argue that the whole stagflation thing was exogenous. There were other things causing that, but it's their dual mandate now.
Yep. There has been a significant U.S. dollar decline. It's actually the worst start to a year since 1973.
Yep.
Declining more than 10% over the past 6 months. Crazy.
Yeah, I think the dollar index started out somewhere near 110 and now it's at like 97.
Yeah, and what you were saying earlier that the yes, the stock market is back to all-time highs, which is interesting in and of itself. But bear with me, when you adjust for the dollar decline, that they're not.
It's a very interesting philosophical question because there are many different ways you can measure the value of what a dollar can buy. And the dollar index is an attempt to do that by pegging it to a basket of other currencies of equivalent value. So normally in economics, you're oftentimes pegging 100 to like some sort of indexed value. So that's why you say, oh, I was at 110. Oh, I was at 97. But if you take the market just as it is in absolute terms, and
you're taking the market.
Yeah, exactly. Pundits love to do this. They love to say, the market's at a record. It's at a record. It's at a record because it's always going to set a record. That's just how money and inflation and growth works. But the actual measured inflation in terms of what your dollar can buy in terms of consumer goods and basic necessities in the U.S. actually isn't that high. We're sitting just above 2%. It's a sweet spot for inflation that you really want to be at. But then you look at the dollar pegged to what other currencies can buy, and the dollar is getting weaker and weaker, which is kind of the intent of current policy on the administration. The idea is that when you make the dollar weaker, well, you say, everybody over here, suddenly from their perspective in, France or Japan, it's now cheaper to buy U.S. goods produced at the same dollar value. So, $100 is suddenly, cheaper.
The idea is it would spur investment in the United States from foreigners.
Yeah.
Part of it, at
Yeah,
least.
the idea is it would spur foreign investment. Now, I would argue it would also, hopefully slow offshoring, too. That's the other intent here. So, that's also the intent of the tariff barriers as well. For example, just the other day I saw an announced rare earth metals refining facility that they want to put together in Massachusetts of all places.
Massachusetts.
Taxachusetts. So if it works, maybe it's a good thing. I just, from my perspective, a lot of the stuff they're trying to reshore is very low-value manufacturing work. It only becomes valuable if you can automate a lot of it.
Yeah. And a lot of this is all about perspective. Yes, okay, the economy, in large part, is very strong. I would say that it's only really been impacted based off of the drastic policy change, right? Otherwise, it's been extremely strong. Stock market back to all-time highs, right? However, it's a little bit misleading. Like Drew said, generally the market is just going to go up. That's just how money works. That's just how the market works. You get companies that go bankrupt are no longer in the market, right? It's a kind of a winner's bias.
Yeah.
But also
survivor's bias. Winner's bias is actually a better way of saying it.
Yeah. But while the market itself might be back to all-time highs, what's contributing to that is very few names. Names like Nvidia, that's now at an insane $4 trillion market cap. So while the index might be back to historic highs, you look at the majority of stocks in the stock market are still down.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, for example, the Russell is still not doing too hot compared to the rest of the market. It's not a great time to necessarily be in small caps unless you're in a few select names.
Now, I think there's a lot of good deals, which I like to see.
We've actually been adding into this. Buying the market in a dip, especially the U.S. market, is unparalleled in its success rate. I gotta say, like in 2020, what did we go up? 45-50% in that 1 year.
Yeah,
It was
opportunistic investing is difficult but very rewarding.
Yes, and it's very difficult because the market is down because people are scared. So if you are scared, you're not going to want to invest. There's a reason you're scared. You can look back at events and be like, oh, I should have bought, but would you have really in the moment? I think the answer is no. So,
and it's difficult as a retail investor to make those decisions, which is part of why we do what we do.
Right. Now, I will say it's not exactly encouraging to be staring down the barrel of a deficit, which is now larger than it was at the peak of World War II. A little bit of an ominous milestone.
Yeah, I mean, we had insane growth since World War II.
We have. I'm talking debt to GDP ratio,
Yeah.
so that kind of controls for it a bit. However, one of the interesting effects of this that I haven't necessarily seen discussed a lot, it's been discussed somewhat. When the government is issuing that much debt, there's a sort of crowding out effect of private financing. So because the government is considered so considerably low risk compared to the rest of the private market, people will generally prefer to invest in government treasuries if they have the option and it's at a reasonable rate, which is why private institutions pay higher rates because they're considered higher risk. Apple's probably not going to exist as long as the U.S. government, or at least the entity that's taking on the U.S. government's debt. So it's one of these things. What can happen is like for example, if the government starts really issuing a lot of reasonably priced debt, it becomes difficult to get financing for things like power plants. So it crowds out reinvestment in the private economy.
Yeah.
The government just kind of starts to be the linchpin of everything, which it kind of already is, but it becomes more pronounced.
And there's very few private companies that exceed that expectation of being more risky than a government. Like on our previous podcast on this day in economic history, which, by the way, stick around to the end again. We got a great history segment that, if you don't know, Drew is not aware of, right?
I never am. He's always keeping me in the dark, this guy.
Yeah, well, it's more interesting to get your on the beat reaction.
Yes.
Yeah. But we talked about before what I was going to say. What's that one company that's going bankrupt now that has been around? I think
Hudson Bay Company.
Yeah, Hudson Bay Company's been around longer than the U.S. government.
Yeah, went bankrupt 2025.
Yeah.
That's been a long. The Hudson Bay Company has existed, I think, longer than the U.S. government has.
Well, that's what I just said.
Oh, okay. Well, I said it better. So,
is that right?
We'll use that part of the clip.
But I said it louder.
You're just going to repeat what I said louder, huh?
Yep.
That's okay. That's how the market works.
European Central Bank did cut its interest rates. So, and I think people are expecting a Fed cut.
They are expecting a Fed cut.
It's a matter of when and how much.
I'm still not convinced it's a certainty.
I don't know. Inflation is doing fine. Unemployment is steady. There's a good point to be made that the Fed is not going to cut.
Exactly, and I feel like the market is consistently it's counting out the possibility that rates stay the same or even go higher. Like, we'll say this as contrarians, but I mean, I just don't necessarily see it in the tea leaves unless you really start seeing a jack up in really decline, like deflation maybe.
Yeah.
Would you see deflation? Would you see a really high unemployment?
I will say I think investors are starting to get used to this uncertain environment.
Yep.
So there are less reactions to, there's just some random headline that there's 50% tariffs on copper, and there's not that much of a reaction as there was 4 months ago.
Right. Yeah, I would say that the it's remarkable how normal the market feels right now. Like, it's just another Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's just another Thursday. Like, the taco trade maybe might be part of it. Trump always chickens out is the trade. But the other thing is that, purchasers who delayed their decision making are mostly assuming, they appear to be assuming that any tariffs that are instituted are temporary as some part of a larger deal. So while the higher tariffs are being reinstituted right now, I don't think anybody really believes that they're permanent.
I think it's clear that he keeps extending it, and I mean, realistically, I think someone among the team has realized that it's economic suicide if you really implement them in their full capacity.
I'm not convinced the team is as big as it used to be.
Yeah.
I saw an analysis. They're sending out form letters to countries when they start jacking up their interest rates.
Well, they claim that's because they're in a position of power where they're getting too many people wanting deals, so they're just going to send a letter. Respond to our letter.
You know what? That could be the case.
Yeah.
I don't think we would know otherwise. Well, the other thing, I don't know if you saw that Brazil tariff.
Yeah, I didn't look too closely.
They jacked up the Brazilian tariffs to 50% because of the
Bolsonaro or something?
Yeah, a court decision that went against Bolsonaro, which was they appeared to have taken it very personally.
Why are we trusting the justice system of foreign governments? That's what I want to know. I barely trust our own justice system.
Well, in this case, they really hated the foreign countries' justice system's determination.
Yeah.
So it seems to be a very personal vendetta on that one. So I guess Brazilian soybeans are going to be expensive, although we're also an exporter of soybeans. So what are we really importing from them? Iron ore or something? Farm products? Timber?
Portuguese.
We're importing the language of Portuguese.
Bitcoin has reached all-time highs, but I think it's above. It might not currently be above 112. At least hit 112,000.
Bitcoin.
What's it at?
It trades 24 hours.
Shoot! It's up. It's above 116,000. I haven't been looking for that long.
You know, people are gonna hate me for saying this, but it's gambling. It's freaking gambling. Like I understand like the concept of you. It's a very liquid market these days. Like people are saying that it's better than treasuries in a lot of ways for certain uses, but I mean, the depth of the U.S. financial markets. You're just reinventing banks with fewer safety nets.
Now I do see the argument that Bitcoin is kind of like a commodity that's digital, because realistically, a commodity like gold or silver, while there is an alternative purpose, it is largely valued, especially gold, just because we find it culturally important and we give it value. And in that same way, Bitcoin has a value because it is culturally important and we give it value, and it has value too because of an alternative purpose, right? And so in that way, it is a digital age version of gold. I see that argument. It's just that I wouldn't necessarily invest in gold either.
Yeah, money's not real, man. It's just a social construct.
Yeah. Not to hate on it, because I think there is value. It's just for an equities investor like us, we have to shift our mindset quite a bit. And it's not something we would invest in as the fund, because it just is, I think, it's strategy drift, which is something that's difficult as a retail investor. There's always the new
shiny thing.
But as a long-term investor...
GARP calls from the shadows.
As a long-term investor, you kind of have to filter the noise, because you got to... A lot of investors, if you stick to something that works, you can make a lot of money. Yeah. Right? Because you're taking opportunities. And that might be a crypto fund that's sticking to what works, right?
I would contend that the most risk-off thing you can do with your money once it's invested, and you've put your money into something, is most often than not, like, just do nothing for a little bit. See if you still feel the same way in a few days. That would be the long-term hold strategist's advice to investing. Crypto funds, and it's such a new instrument. It's like if you got in on the ground floor. Here's the crypto guy's real argument, is that it's like if you got on the ground floor of the global economy, of like, the first futures, like modern futures exchanges and stuff like that. And I just don't know. It's too early to tell, Like, it's a level of risk where it's not linked to an underlying asset. It's like us going into commodities. We're just not going to do it.
And that's my point, is that I'm not hating on commodities either. It's just we're making aggressive returns by picking individual direct equities investments.
Yeah,
that's just, I'm
Although-
going to stay in my lane.
That's not to say we won't invest in companies that profit off of the crypto space. We have done that.
Yeah.
We've made money on that and made much less money than we could have otherwise if we'd held a lot longer, which...
It's always going to happen.
Yeah.
Hindsight's 2020. Yes, I would have loved to have a 5,000% return, but I'll take 100%.
Yeah, I wasn't going to hold into even the 1,000% return, so a 5,000% return was just not something that was ever in the cards.
Hey, you win some, you win some.
Yeah, I either win or I win. It's such a difficult choice.
As they say, bears make money, bulls make money, and greedy pigs get slaughtered.
Yeah, that's the problem with holding too long.
Yep.
Don't fall in love with your investments.
Yeah. But you can fall in love with me. I might not love you back.
Bold words for a man who is currently taken.
Well, that's, like I said, I just might not love you back. But I love each and every one of you. All 2 of our fans. But there's going to be some bank earnings next week, which I think is going to be interesting. I think Wells Fargo is up first, Q2 earnings.
Mm-hmm.
Give people another, looking at the banks, you get an economic indicator there, right? I mean, you watch what they say, you watch what they do.
You watch out how they react to regulatory events, things like that. The banks have to make all sorts of filings, which give you insight into the company. You just got to be willing to sit through a few boring slide decks and some very, very boring legalese.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's about that time. What do you think?
I'm thinking it's time.
Yeah?
I'm thinking it's time.
It's
I
time?
would like to know. I'm curious what you have to say.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I got a lot to say.
It's not a compliment. I'm nearly at fisticuffs here.
Oh, well, what I've got to say today is this day in economic history. And today is July 10th, so we're looking at July 10th in history. I've curated a little list here. I've got one I thought was most interesting one at the end. But I got a few to color the palette.
Let's see if I react to any of them.
July 10th, 1913. Death Valley's dubious distinction. Picture Oscar Denton, a ranch caretaker turned weather observer, squinting at his thermometer in the blazing desert heat of Death Valley, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The mercury had climbed to an absolutely mind-boggling 134 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to literally cook an egg on the sidewalk, if there'd been any sidewalks in the godforsaken corner of California. While Denton dutifully recorded his observation, he probably had no idea he was creating a world record that would be debated for over a century.
Wait, 113 degrees Fahrenheit?
134 degrees Fahrenheit.
134. Okay.
56.7 degrees Celsius. Modern weather sleuths now point out that the temperatures at nearby stations that day were dramatically lower, leading some experts to suggest that this thermometer may have been influenced by anything from sandstorms to equipment malfunctions. But the record stands, making July 10th, 1913 officially the hottest day in Earth's recorded history. But it is hotly debated.
Yeah, interesting factoid that I actually do know about weather temperature recording is that, it's highly dependent on the individual instruments and their location, not just like in geographically, but also like how far they are off the ground, even because the temperature can be wildly different from the surface versus a few feet up versus like 100 feet up. But these days, you can actually take temperature readings from satellites. Granted, the resolution is very low, but they have recorded similar temperatures on certain like kilometer by kilometer pixels taken of the Earth's surface that just nobody happens to live in because they're hellish places.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for record low temperatures in Antarctica. There are places that have recorded lower temperatures than have actually been recorded by instruments. So,
I just want to point out that you didn't catch my pun.
what was your pun?
It's hotly debated.
Oh, get out of here! You see, I got a filter for these puns. I just don't react. If I don't like something, my brain just doesn't process it.
To be fair, I didn't catch it until after I said it.
You wrote this.
I didn't write that. I just said it.
Okay, fine.
Anyways, July 10th, 1925. Monkey business in Dayton.
Ohio? For those
Tennessee.
Tennessee. For those that don't know, there's also a Dayton, Oregon, not far from us.
It's true. True.
So it's a popular name.
The sleepy town of Dayton, Tennessee had been economically struggling when a group of local boosters hatched a scheme. They would deliberately stage a legal showdown to put their town on the map. They recruited the affable 24-year-old John Scopes, who wasn't even sure he'd actually taught evolution, to serve as their willing defendant. So they had a legal circus where essentially they had what was called the Butler Act that said you couldn't teach evolution.
Oh, the monkey trial. Yeah.
Yeah, but they deliberately had mandated textbooks that taught evolution. And so it was all just a sham in order to have a publicity stunt so people would recognize Dayton, Tennessee.
Oh, so it did. Well, I gotta imagine. Well, I mean, it's stuck in the public consciousness.
Yeah, they forced the teachers to violate the very law they were supposed to uphold. And it was so it was so divisive. The judge actually, it was hot. It was really hot. And it was in July. The judge moved the proceedings to the courthouse lawn.
So it was outside.
And where Brian and Darrow, they engaged in a famous theological sparring match before a crowd of spectators actually just watching it. Like it was a county fair event.
Man, that's how we should settle things in debates, in grand spectacle debates like that. Like, we don't have that as much anymore. It's all online.
Yeah. Was interesting. July 10th, 1962. You may know this one. At 4:35 in the morning on July 10th, 1962.
Why would I know this?
While most well, you were there. No. While most Americans were still dreaming, a beach ball-sized satellite named Telstar blasted off from Cape Canaveral and changed the world forever. Are you aware of this?
Is this the first U.S. satellite launched?
This wasn't just any government project. It was AT&T's ambitious $50 million gamble, equivalent to about $500 million.
Communication satellite.
Equivalent to about $500 million today, to prove that private enterprise could conquer space.
Huh.
So, 2 days later, amazed viewers watched grainy but historic images of an American flag fluttering at the Andover, Maine ground station, transmitted live across the Atlantic to France. It's
the first satellite broadcast.
It was so inspiring that it spawned a #1 hit instrumental song by the Tornadoes. Even caught attention to the Pope. VP LBJ
Good old LBJ
made the first official phone call via satellite.
I tell you what, if anyone was going to be Johnson, it would be Lyndon.
What?
Because Lyndon B. Johnson.
But what is B. Johnson? What does that mean?
Oh my God, dense.
Anyways, are you talking about Jumbo?
Sure. I'm talking about Jumbo.
For those who don't know, Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, as he's known colloquially, whipped out his Johnson, for lack of a better word, in front of reporters, to which he called Jumbo.
Famously immortalized in the movie Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Though Telstar operated for only a few months before radiation from the Van Allen belt fried its electronics, it had already ushered in the age of instant global communication.
Yep.
Historic.
Yeah.
July 10th, 1967. New Zealand adopted the dollar. Not the US dollar, the New Zealand dollar.
They were using the Australian dollar before that?
They didn't US dollarize, they dollarized because they replaced pounds, shillings, and pence.
Oh, I see.
Right.
So they were using British currency prior to that, right?
The old British currency where it was like a really confusing blend of things didn't add up.
To be fair, the British still use confusing blends of things. They still weigh themselves by stone in Britain.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. To be fair, we kind of do that too, though. We still use pounds.
They had a nationwide campaign because $2 was, you got $2 for every pound. Apparently, it was an unforgettable jingle that said, "Don't shed a tear in July next year for cumbersome pounds and pence."
Okay.
Yeah. The logistics, by the way. They had secret trains carrying 700 tons of new currency, escorted by police and army personnel that crisscrossed the country in the weeks before, quote-unquote, DC Day. The government had rejected more colorful currency names like Fern, Kiwi, and zeal
Man, I would have loved to have a currency called Kiwi.
in favor of the practical dollar following Australia's leads. When the banks reopened on July 10th, New Zealanders discovered that their new money featured native birds and plants, complicated geometric patterns, and enough security features that would thwart counterfeiters.
Nice.
It was actually really smooth. It became a model for other countries in the way that they did it.
You know, the Australians had a petition to rename their Australian dollar dollary dues. It's apparently what they call them over there.
I wish they did that.
I wish they did that.
The dollar
but
dues.
you know, I can be satisfied with the the dong, the Vietnamese dong.
That's true. That's true.
Of
course,
that could be taken out of context. Anyways, we'll see how that shakes out in the editing.
Hey, it's only funny in English. July 10th, 1985. The Rainbow Warrior goes down. On the evening of July 10th, 1985, it started innocently enough aboard the Rainbow Warrior moored in Auckland Harbor, with crew members sharing the last 2 bottles of beer around the mess room table. Fernando Pereira, the Portuguese photographer, had just celebrated his 35th birthday.
35th?
35th birthday, and the crew was preparing for their mission to protest French nuclear testing in the Pacific. Just before midnight, the lights went out with a sharp crack, followed by a roar of rushing water. In the confusion, some crew members thought they'd been hit by a wayward tugboat, until a second explosion made it clear this was no accident. The ship's steel mast tilted toward the wharf as the Rainbow Warrior began her final voyage into the harbor floor, taking Pereira with her when he returned to his cabin to retrieve his camera equipment.
Yeah,
What followed was...
That's why they always tell you not to go after your stuff in an emergency, because that's how people die.
Yeah. What followed was an international scandal of such magnitude that it forced the resignation of the French defense minister and created a diplomatic crisis between France and New Zealand. The French government's initial denials crumbled under investigation, revealing a state-sponsored terrorist operation that backfired spectacularly, generating far more negative publicity for French nuclear testing than the original protest ever could have achieved.
Yeah, that's why, that is the secret sauce of nonviolent protests, is that you've basically forced the people you're protesting to do something abhorrent, and then you get attention from that and sympathy. That's why the nonviolent stuff works, if your opponent is being violent.
Here's what I thought was the most interesting thing. You might disagree.
I already disagree. I don't know what it is yet. I already disagree with you, Quinn. Isn't that how this works? That's how the whole fun works, by the way.
Yelling. But at the end of the day, you can't fire your brother.
Yeah, that's the real secret sauce. Can't fire your brother. You can, but...
We'll still be brothers. Doesn't matter what you say.
Okay. What's the thing?
Hey, don't look. Don't peeking. Imagine being Nicholas Biddle, the sophisticated bank president, sitting in his Philadelphia office when news arrived
All right, I'm imagining. I'm sitting.
Don't cut me off.
I'm just agreeing with you.
Imagine being Nicholas Biddle, the sophisticated bank president, sitting in his Philadelphia office when news arrived that the rough-hewn Tennessee frontiersman in the White House had just delivered a verbal haymaker to your entire financial empire. Jackson's veto message was less a political document than a declaration of war against what he saw as a corrupt aristocracy of money. The president had already told confidants, quote, "The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it." The president had on July 10th, 1832, I hope Jackson wasn't alive in 1932. And on July 10th, 1832, he made good on that promise with a veto message so fiery it could have melted the gold reserves. Clay and his supporters had gambled that Jackson wouldn't dare veto a bill with such overwhelming congressional support, but they underestimated the man who had survived multiple duels and considered political combat just another form of warfare. He rejected the second charter, the charter of the Second Bank of the United States. It was scheduled to expire in 1836, but Congress passed an early recharter bill, and Jackson declared the bank quote, unauthorized by the Constitution, subversive to the rights of the states, and dangerous to the liberties of the people, end quote.
I forgot about this. Yeah, it was deauthorized.
The veto became his central issue in the 1832 presidential election between Jackson and Henry Clay.
And people really hated the central bank.
Jackson's actions also contributed to the Panic of 1837.
Yep. It's almost like you need a central bank for things. It's almost like bankers, no matter how much you hate them, serve an integral purpose to your economy and can't be easily replaced.
It's true.
So, anyways, hug your local central banker for us.
Or don't.
Or don't.
Punch
or
him
give him the finger.
Punch him and ask him to lower interest rates.
Yeah. That's the thing about central bankers. They're very resilient.
Yeah. On that note, I'm Quinn Milligan.
I'm Drew Milligan.
And this has been the Capital Call. Coming back to you Monday mornings. We'll see you next week.
Stay liquid.
Stay liquid.